Thank you, thank you. Thank you all for coming, because the weather report said Armageddon is here in New York with wind and rain, so happy to see you all here. I'm Jack Reznicki, as I have here, Canon Explorer of Light. I've been one of the original Explorers of Light, which I've been proud to be. And I'm just going to move this along. And as David said, I'm very big on copyright. Everything here is copyrighted to me, just so you know, unless otherwise stated. I'm going to start with a quick little video first, just to give you an overview before I start on some of the stuff I'm going to be going over. So. And that's it. Thank you very much for coming. I'm all done. That's all the pictures. Thank you. So a little housekeeping first before I start. I'm going to start off a little slow, and then we're going to build up. I got a lot of area, a lot of different things to cover. If you want to contact me, that's my email address, my website, reznicki.com, or you can follow me on Instagram at Reznicki, if you can spell it. I'll just make sure everybody gets a picture of it. I'm going to start with one of my favorite quotes. I love photo quotes. There's so many really, really good ones. And this is one of my all-time favorites. And it goes like this. It's a long one. One of the greatest difficulties in writing a book for beginners in any art is to make it simple enough. 9 out of 10 photographers are, unfortunately, ignorant of art. Some think manipulation all sufficient. Others too much absorbed in the scientific principles involved in making pictures. And I think that's just a wonderful quote, especially when you know that it was written by Henry Peach Robinson, who lived from 1830 to 1901. And it sounds like it could have been said today. And it's just to show you that things don't change. Past is prologue. He wrote this in this book, Pictorial Effects in Photography, in 1869. And the theme continues over and over again. The photographers are getting too involved in the mechanics of photography and not so much in the art part of it. We're going to cover both today. I also ran across this in an issue of Popular Photography from 1948. Basically the same thing. He was saying the exact same things. People are saying the same things today about Photoshop and a lot of other issues. It's the more the things change, the more they stay the same. So the two things that he really talked about, Henry Peach Robinson, was the mechanics of photography. And I'm going to cover that. It's about camera settings and lens choices to help you take better pictures. I'm able to get things today because of my tools that I wasn't able to get many, many years ago. I'm also going to talk about visual issues, such as composition, color, and that elusive impact. What is impact in photography? And to me, impact is one of the most important things you can have in photography, in your photos. It's the difference between a picture that's like, so-so, and one that really, really jumps at people. So these are some of the words when I looked up impact just to see what it was in the dictionary. And these are some of the things: impressive, powerful, persuasive, effective, influential, poignant, having authority, possessing strengths. So in other words, it's just something that's not the same old, same old. It's images that really grab people. So what makes an impactful photo? And what do I mean by beyond the postcard? What is beyond the postcard? And for me, as a photographer, it's those images that you see all the time that everybody gets. And it's trying to do something different. It's trying to do something that will grab people, not what they're expecting. I've done a lot of judging in photo contests all around the world. And what I always look for is something that I hadn't seen before. The same subject done differently. And before I get into that, I just wanted to have one quick rule about taking better pictures. And I think this is a pretty simple rule to follow. Start with the lens cap off. So there's this legal concept called scenes affaire. Scenes affaire has to do about scenes that have to be done. It's a French term. And it's, if you're doing a film or something and you're doing New York, there's certain elements that you're going to have in any film. If you're shooting the South Bronx, it's going to be, rusted out places and deteriorating places back then. Try and find a place now for a reasonable price in Bed-Stuy. Or if you're doing Times Square, if you're doing it now, it's the neon and everybody going and the bright lights. If you're doing it in the 70s and 80s, it's going to be the pimps and the prostitutes and those weird people. It's the things that would always be there. It's what's expected in the place. Now, when I'm shooting for a magazine or a client on location somewhere, one of the things they talk about all the time is sense of place. Get a picture that gives us a sense of the place. That's important. So there's certain things you're going to get if you're going to photograph New York. The Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, Times Square. But how do you get the essence of a place? How do you get something that gives you the feeling of the place and where you are? I mean, for me, something like this, which is a nice foggy night, and getting the water tanks that are, it seems to be the emblem of New York for many New Yorkers. To me, this is a different approach, not what's completely expected. Here's something else that I'll talk about a lot about something in this picture too, which is repeated patterns and filling a frame later on. But this is another thing that gives you the feeling of New York. If you're doing Paris, and I couldn't find one of my daylight shots of Paris. This is a nighttime scene of Paris before the lights were copyrighted. As you know, the current lights of the Eiffel Tower are copyrighted, and supposedly you can't use it. But this is predating that. This is from film. The Eiffel Tower is, how do you cover something so iconic? If somebody's saying, photograph Paris, oh, and we want something Eiffel Tower. This is a shot that I came up with. And it's different. You don't have to see the whole tower. You know that it's there. It gives you the story. It gives you the feeling of being there. It's a sense of place. Of course, there's a lot of other things I did before I got to this one, just to cover myself. Other views. And this one I always really liked, because I like the colors, the red and the blue. And we're going to talk about color combinations and how that attracts me to certain things. So I saw this on the street and I said, ooh, this looks really great. This has that feeling of Paris. I know I'm there, but it's so straightforward. It's not what I want. I want to try something else. So I sat there with a friend and suddenly somebody came by with an accordion. And I tilted the camera and I got this shot. And I think it's much more impactful than just a straightforward, oh, look at this. This is known as a happy accident. I mean, I didn't know somebody was going to come by with an accordion and a red accordion. I'll show you a lot of happy accidents throughout this. I shoot a lot more unhappy accidents. The trick is not to show those. Edit out. So a couple of other things to give you a sense of this. This is obviously the Leaning Tower of Pisa. What are you going to do with that? I mean, you photograph it. It's an iconic image. Everybody's doing it. I'm doing a lot of processing these days to give me that impact. I'll do whatever it takes to get it to look a little bit different. I did a workshop in Tuscany this past year, last summer, and Tuscany invokes that warm, painterly feeling. So I'm going to add texture to this image and warm it up. I mean, when you're there, it's a lot more blue than this. It's not this yellow, but show me a picture of Tuscany where the color temperature hasn't been boosted over to the yellow a lot more, to the warm side, because that's the feeling it invokes when you're there. Going to Africa, I photographed the animals like everybody does. I went to Africa with my wife, photographed the animals. It was fun. I got a lot of stuff. This hog kept wanting to sing to me from some play or something, some cartoon. This was a skeptical bull, water buffalo rather. And I shoot the animals as I see them. And it's fun. I'm a photographer. I like getting these. I'll shoot the postcards, because that's what this is to me. These are postcard images. They're fairly standard. Anybody goes with a long lens, these are the type of images you're going to get. What's always interested me more than that, wherever I go, are the people. The people to me are so unique, and I'm looking for things that invoke a different type of feel, and I'll talk more and more about that. But these are some of the images from Africa of people doing things. I'm not looking for posed images. You can see in this, she's turning her head because you can see how her earpieces are flying off her ear. We were staying at a camp in the Serengeti, and I started following the guys around to see where they're working and what they're doing. And at night, they come around with these lanterns. And seeing this guy light up all the lanterns, to me, was the impactful image. That's the one I really liked. But I like getting these types of shots. I'm going to talk about how I get these. These slice of lights, these little moments of just the real life that's happening there. And I just love the little girl on the end with her arm up, creating the one diagonal in the image. Of course, the boys hanging around the local Coca-Cola stand, the bar. This was something I did for Southwest Airline magazine. I've done a lot of airline magazines. And the assignment was to shoot at the Hamptons. And we got all the regular Hampton things and wonderful places. And he said, for the cover, I need something, again, with a sense of place. So these boardwalks were really good. But it was just an empty boardwalk. So I saw a little girl and I asked if she would run up and down for me. And she ran up and down the wood, and then in a couple she just went off to the side. And that's the one that they picked for the cover. I'll also look for something different that tells me where I am. And I'll show you more of those later on. But to me, this is a postcard. This is Auckland. I'll shoot the same thing. I'll shoot what everybody does. But I keep calling them postcard images. Getting ready for this talk, I ran across a couple tear sheets, finding things that showed me a sense of place. And this was restaurants in Boston, I believe. And I get the standard stuff because that's what the art directors want. So I'm going to shoot the food. I'm going to shoot the cook there. But if you look, the biggest image on the page is the one that gives you a feeling, an emotion. It's the glasses. It's not the direct image. Those are the ones that a lot of people want. So I got a lot of territory to cover, but before we do, I got a secret to share with you, because this is the Canon presentation. It's a new camera. Don't tell anybody. It's just among us. And what it is, it's a smart camera. And let me explain what it is. Now this is not a smart camera. This is an old-fashioned camera. So we got a new camera coming out. It's top secret. We really don't have pictures of it at this point, but the menus in it are very familiar to us. And that's where we learn what's going on with this new camera. And if you look at the back, you'll see that the menu looks the same as pretty much all the other Canon cameras, except up in the upper right-hand corner, they have this SC, smart camera. And with that, you get a whole different set of menu items. And from the menu items, you can see what the camera can do. So we press on Smart Camera, and we go to it, and it'll start saying, make model hotter, slim down 5, 10, 15 pounds, remove all tourists, add more hair, make taller. And we think one of the engineers had a problem at home because they put in the remove brother-in-law button there. And open eyes. Well, this is a joke, obviously. I have to say that because at one of these lectures, somebody actually asked me when it was coming out. I was gobsmacked. I didn't know what to say. But the reality is, and the reason I get into that, is that the smart camera is here today. We actually have smart cameras, and we have to know the functions in them to be able to utilize them to their utmost ability. Generally, people are using such a small percentage of what the cameras can do. You know, they know the basic functions on it, they know which button to press, and they know some of the settings, and they go out and shoot. But knowing the technology, there's images that we can take now because of the technology. The technology is enabling us as photographers to get images we couldn't get before. There's things like fast focus, high ISO and auto ISO, and I'm going to give you examples on all of these. Advanced meters. The metering system now in the cameras are amazing. And ETTL flash. The cameras, the film cameras we used to shoot with were really, really good mechanical cameras. They were like fine watches. Camera repair people were like watchmen. You know, they'd go in and get the gears and everything fit in small places. The cameras we're using today are like fine computers. There's probably more computing power in your camera than they had to send, men to the moon. It's incredible what it can do, and we need to take advantage of that. So this is an image I took at the Lotus Lantern Festival parade in Seoul, Korea, a few years ago. The lens was a 50 millimeter 1.2 Canon lens shot at 1.2. And we've had that lens even in the film days. But what made this different and enabled me to get the shot is it was photographed at ISO 1600. Now, the film days, 800 was about as far as you can go. You want it to live dangerously, you could get some 1000 film, but you're going to get huge grain. And that was about the extent of it. Nowadays, 1600 is pretty low. We can go much, much past that. But without that high ISO, I can't get these shots, especially shooting at 1.2. Also, autofocus. The autofocus and the different types of autofocus we have these days are enabling us to get shots like this. At 1.2, if I didn't have the autofocus, I wouldn't be able to capture that. I mean, my eyes are good, and I remember the days of manually focusing. And when autofocus came out, you were going, oh no, I don't need that. I'm a professional, I can focus. Then you get older and your eyes change, and suddenly that autofocus, which keeps getting better and better and better, this dual pixel focusing that Canon has out now is just really incredible. And it's so fast and so accurate. I know when I got that little dot on her face, she's in focus. So images like this are a result of technology. And like I said, I'm going to go over a lot of the mechanical stuff first, and we're going to get to the art stuff in the second part of this. So exposure triangle, you guys know this. I'm not going to go over it really. If you don't know it, it's something you should know. But there's three legs to our exposures: the ISO, the f-stop, and the shutter speed. What's changed is it used to be that you'd set the ISO at what you were going to shoot, and then you had a choice of either the f-stop or the shutter speed you could do on auto, and it would vary. You'd have to set two of those. But you couldn't get the ISO. Now we can. We have auto ISO, and it's one of my favorite features, and I'm amazed at how many people don't use it. How many people here use auto ISO regularly? Wow, pretty good. That's about half, almost half, which is more than I usually get. But the beauty of it is I can set the shutter speed and my aperture exactly where I want it, and I'm going to show you results of that and why I do it. This image I'm going to go over when I talk about composition later on, but it was something I shot in Africa. We were walking toward this little hut, and I'm getting this wonderful shot, and I'm so happy because I could just see it coming together. And I didn't know we were going into the little hut. It was a schoolroom full of little kids. And we walk in, and I get this shot, and it's wonderful. It's like the first shot I get. You keep shooting and shooting and shooting, and nothing else had this composition, this feel to it. This was the best one. And if you look really closely on this, you see there's a little fly above her eye, and you can see the wings on the fly. Well, the amazing part is I didn't reset my camera from outside, but I had it on auto ISO. And when I went in and got this and see that I captured, I said, great. And then I looked at the data and it said I was shooting at 25,600. I went, oh my God. I thought, oh, what's, and I'm looking at it and say, but the file looks really good. Now, one of the things that also helped along with the ISO was the fact that I had evaluative metering. The metering these days, especially the evaluative, is smart metering. If I had central or spot, it probably would have overcome, if I had just, the old-fashioned center weight, it would have overcompensated for the highlights in the back. But the cameras today know when something is heavily backlit, so it didn't try to overcompensate for it. Now, I did open this up a little bit in post, and I did do a very, very light noise reduction. Now, very little. You're not always going to get it that clean. It was that clean because I had a good amount of light in that room. If you're in a darker room like this, you're going to get more noise at a high ISO like that. But the fact that I could get this because I walked in and forgot to reset my camera, I got what's one of my favorite shots, and this was the metadata from it. 1/750th of a second at f8. It was a EF 24:105 f4 on a EOS 1DX, and if you look, you can see the ISO was set to 25,600. So what's the big deal about that? When do I use it for other types of shots when I'm not making a mistake in getting good shots? I do a lot of these shots that I call road shots. Now this was a full frame shot. I cropped it like this because that's where I wanted everything. And these types of shots I've always done, but in the past I would get maybe 50% of what I'd get. And road shots are shots that I take from a moving vehicle. We're going from one place to another. And for me, especially in Africa, those were the best images. It wasn't going to the park and seeing the animals, and that was wonderful and lovely, and I had a great time. But you're going through these places and seeing these scenes, and it's like, the guy's in a hurry to get there. He's going 50, 60 miles an hour, and I'm shooting out of the car window. And I do that a lot wherever I go, not just Africa. But normally I'd get about 50% of the shots. And the reason is because the light would change. I would have my shutter speed too low, or I didn't have enough depth of field. Nowadays, I can just set the auto ISO to float. I don't care where it goes. I want to be able to get the shots. I want to get a fast enough shutter speed, 1,000th of a second, 1,500th of a second, f8 or a little more, and just depending on the day, I'll let that go. Also, the autofocus is something else too. As you're moving fast, I don't want it suddenly focusing beyond. These things happen instantly. Either you're getting them or you're not. And by the way, it's a great exercise, especially with digital, for hand-eye coordination. So here's some shots that I get that I call my my road shots. And shots like this, you can see like the bicycle in the back, he's there and it's not. It's just there for an instant. These are the happy accidents you get doing this. This was in the Philippines. We're going actually slowly through this town, but we're not stopping. And I got this, and then later on I saw this and said, wow, this really jumped out at me. And these are just some other shots in the Philippines. This is in Indonesia. And this happens very quickly. I mean, some of these I see later when I start editing, and you're going, wow, look at this thing just jump out, the way they're framed, the body English, everything in that. This is one of my favorites. I wish I could say that it took hard work and I stood there and I waited. And no, we're going by in a car and I'm taking pictures quickly. And take a look, it's got foreground, the little boy is in this nice little frame. There's things in the background going on to give you a sense of what's going on. This child is in mid-air running there. It's framed great. And it's the type of shots that, because I have the auto ISO, the fixed shutter, the fixed aperture, now instead of getting 50% of these shots, I'm getting 90% of these shots. And I'm a motor drive too, so thank goodness for big cards in digital. I mean, it's like a never-ending roll of film for me. I remember the days when I'd have to go to places and shoot with film, and we take 100 or 120 rolls of film. How many are we going to do at a higher ISO? How many tungsten are we going to take? I got to really parse it out for a long trip, and it was a lot of stuff to take, and we didn't want to go through the X-ray. So digital for me, I ran to right away because of the travel photography. and photographing kids in the studio, which is another story. So this is another image, and this is the metadata on that. This was a thousandth of a second at f8 at 3200 ISO at 24 millimeters on my 24-105. So could I get this in the other days? No, because I don't know what the light would be. We're going into shade in some areas, we're going to sunlight in other areas. So if you don't have your ISO, set it to A for automatic. Another thing on the camera to set sometimes, which is helpful, is a highlight alert. So it's usually disabled, and if you enable it, you'll get this. And this is a setup shot with a model, but it was the best example I had because we did this for something else. And you'll get the blinkies. And that's telling me that the highlights are blown out in the camera. So if you set it to that, when you're reviewing the images, you'll see that little blinky, and you'll know that there's no data there. And in this case, I didn't care about it. There wasn't anything important in the parts that were flashing in the white. I didn't need detail there. There wasn't anything important being blown out for me. Also, focusing modes are important to know in your camera. And you guys need to do the one thing that the majority of photographers don't do: read the manual. You get the camera and we start playing with it, and rarely read a lot of the manual. So when you're focusing on something like this, this is what you'll see through the viewfinder. I'm going to change it to yellow so we can see it. It's not yellow in your camera, but for illustration purposes. So the way focus works, and this is called single point focusing. So I have a little square, and that's where it's going to focus. And the focusing is based on contrast. So if you hit an area that doesn't have a lot of contrast, like his thigh, or if you're taking a portrait and you're focusing on the forehead, the camera's going, I got nothing to focus on. I need some contrast in there. So single point focusing I'll do when I'm in the studio and I got somebody and I want that forward eye and I'm in a very narrow depth of field. I want to know exactly where that focus is. I'll do that. When I'm doing something like this, something moving like this, I don't have to be that exact. There's two functions. One is autofocus point expansion to 4 points, and the one that I'll use commonly is 8 points. And the 8 points means that it's going to search where your main square in the middle is, but it's also going to look at these. If it doesn't find contrast here, it's going to immediately, instantly go to one of those where it finds contrast in that area, and we'll focus that way. That's a simplistic explanation of how it works, but you should know these different focusing techniques. There's also autofocus selection, where the camera's going to pick it within that area of where to focus, and it's really smart. It'll pick what's closer to the camera, but it's smart enough because it's a computer where if you're shooting like table settings at a table and something's extremely close up, it won't focus on that. It does think. Like I said, these cameras are computers and they're really, really sophisticated. There's also zone focusing where you can just pick zones and it'll focus there. Different cameras will have different functions of focus, some better than others. So you have to read the book on it, go online. There's a lot of resources, but really find out what type of focus will help you get the images you need, especially with fast-moving objects. This is metering modes, and I did a tour a few years ago for Canon with my good friend Jim DiVitale, who's unfortunately passed away a few months ago. These were his images in the center of this. But this is to go over the different metering modes. Center weight is in our cameras today. Center weight is actually something from the 60s in SLRs, and it's exactly what it does. It gives you more weight to the center of the image as far as exposure than what's on the edges. And it's a legacy metering system. I think it's a dumb metering system for what our options are today. They have it there because it's been there, so they're not going to take it away. These days, I can uncheck things in my camera on what I want to come up as I'm scrolling through. This is one of the things I uncheck because I don't need it. Spot is really good, and the spot isn't that big. The spot's a little 3% spot in the middle, or it could move depending on the camera you have. The problem is with 3% spot is if it's a little off, from here to there, if the tone changes, your exposure changes. Now, sometimes it's important to have it that precise. A lot of times it isn't. On some of my cameras, I have partial partial spot rather. And it's a bigger area of concentration, and it's more like 10%. And that means it's going to average it out a little bit better. It's not as critical to be right at the point where I get a little more leeway is getting that exposure. But the one that I'll have for the majority of the time, and I don't get off of this unless I have something specific that I'm working with, is evaluative. And that's a default in most of the cameras. Evaluative is smart metering. It'll compensate for the tricky situations like backlighting. It'll divide the picture into different zones, and it'll work off your focus point, depending on the camera you have. Oops, I'm probably unplugging something at this point. So again, read the book, find out about what type of metering system you have. That's going to affect the pictures that you get and help you along. I want to talk a little bit about perspective and lens choices. Oh, I have this in twice. Oh, there we go. Lens choices. Why? Oh, yeah. I worked on that. I was going to have a lot of little things like that, and I decided it was more distracting than anything else. But an image like this, landscape images, usually I like with a very, very long lens because it compresses what I see. And I'm working on that compression on the landscapes. So this was something I just shot in northern Israel just this past December. And you can see with a long 400 millimeter on my 100 to 400, it's compressing everything into one plane, which gives it that pattern look that I really like. This is in Siena. Wonderful view, and again, with a long lens, it's compressing all the buildings. I'm not getting that depth that I would get if I had a wide lens or a wider lens. This was in Indonesia, and this guy was coming at us with a boat, and I had a long lens, and as he was getting closer, I switched quickly to a wide lens. Much bigger boat, and it's just changing the lens. Let me show you the comparison between the two. So the top one was done with 100 millimeters, and the bottom one was done at 30 millimeters. One's expanding, one is compressing what I'm seeing. The boat wasn't that big. It's a 30 millimeter that does it. Things appear, closer than they are. This was in Turkey, in the Library of Celsus in Ephesus, the ruins at Kusadasi. This is the postcard shot. You get there and you see the facade of the library that's still standing, and everybody's getting pictures of it. And I'm shooting with a long lens, and it's getting everything square because we want everything square. But to me, that's the postcard shot. You could almost have, 3 little holes in a spot where you're going to place your tripod. It's like going to Horseshoe Bend, or Half Dome in Yosemite. It's like there's a spot where everybody stands, and there's probably a line to get to that spot to take pictures. That's a postcard shot. So as I got closer, I had my wide angle lens, extreme wide angle. And this is what I shot, and this is what I prefer. And it creates really nice diagonal lines and very strong leading lines. The funny thing it does is the clouds, even though it's just a normal straight day, because of the wide angle, it almost looks like the clouds are lines leading into it. They're leading lines going into it. And I think it's a much better image because of that. And that's one of the tricks that a lot of guys who used to shoot annual reports used to do. They'd have to go to a factory. It was an empty building. There wasn't anything, and they got to make it look like something. And if it was really, really bad, that was when they got their extreme wide angle, because it would make it look like something. And the perspective that you would get changes. This is down going to the Galapagos, and there's this really nice big rock there. And again, the clouds are almost aiming into it because of the wide angle. So how do you see the world? That's a question I always like to ask. How do you see the world? Are you a telephoto person or a wide angle person? And people tend to be one or the other. I tend to go telephoto. I like pieces of things. So are you the person who's going to shoot the whole group like this, a little bit wide, to get the scene in? Or do you focus in on one person on that type of a scene? Do you focus in on the pagoda? Or are you going to pull back and show the context of where it is? And if you find you're doing more of one than the other all the time, it's good practice to stop and think and just change. If you're always going out with a telephoto, just for exercise, go out with just a wide angle at some point, or vice versa. And when I'm shooting these things, I'm thinking that way. I'm thinking close up and wide all the time. What's the story? We're in China at this lake with these fishermen, and my first instinct is to shoot close. And this is not a great shot. I mean, you got, all the bird dung everywhere. This great old guy is sitting there with a cigarette in his hand, which is not adding to the mood for me. So I pull back. And the air quality wasn't great either. So when it's not, I'll go to black and white. So I also added a texture, a paper texture onto this with the color. Now, if you look closely, the guy's still smoking his cigarette in his hand. It's in his mouth now. But it creates a feeling, a place. And here's another one where I cropped in and just created a very wide view of this. And I know this is a good shot because my wife let me make a print of this so we could put in our house. That's a rare instance. So we really like this image. So here's another one. Do you shoot the whole pool of hippopotamus, or do you get close up? And just some more examples. I love this shot, but it's also really nice to see the setting it's in. Now, these two types of things fall into two things. It's parts with detail and whole with feeling. Parts with detail are things like architectural photography, tabletop. It's the detail. It's getting everything right. It's that temple where everything is squared. And whole and feeling is more fashion portrait, photojournalism type of photography. It's more about the feeling. And these terms and this type of looking at photographs is actually Gestalt theory. Gestalt, and it's pronounced Gestalt, is a theory of how we see things. It's a quote that I have is, it's the rules of organization of perceivable scenes. And it's where sometimes the total is greater than the parts. And let me explain that. There's certain things that are very specific, and I'm going to go over these as I continue in Gestalt theory. One of them is figure ground articulation. One is the proximity principle, similarity principle, past experience principle. There's a whole bunch of other areas. This is as basic Gestalt as I can get to. So there's certain things in Gestalt that you look at, such as this. This and this, most people will see a triangle and a square. But there is no triangle and square. It's your perception of it. It's ground foreground. What really you have in this picture is four Miss Pac-Mans perfectly lined up. And it's creating that square for you. And that's figure ground rule, where if you see the FedEx logo, you know that's figure ground because that has an arrow in the logo. And most of you, if you don't know where the arrow is in it, it's right here. And that's done on purpose. FedEx, it's where it's going. If you go to Baskin-Robbins, they have 31 in their logo in Baskin-Robbins in the B because they have 31 flavors. This is one of my favorite shots of friend Jay Maisel. This is when we were in San Francisco. We were doing street photography. And if you know Jay, he is the king of ground background. He gets things in front of him that meld with the background in incredible ways. If you don't know his work, he's one of the geniuses of photography and a hero to many. And I always love this because this is Jay. It's ground foreground, ground background. Where images like this I really like because you don't know where things are. You don't know ground foreground on something like this. These are other shots like this. So when I see pictures like this, sometimes you go, the screen is in the way. These beads are in my way. Well, now I look at it differently. I see it as part of the image, and it creates and gets you more involved in the image. It's something a little more interesting. Same type of thing. So the proximity principle can also be called completion or closure. And in this famous painting, which, by the way, is a photograph I took in the Sistine Chapel. You're not allowed to take pictures in the Sistine Chapel. This is the principle of it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. So you take it quickly and you scoot out. But the whole point of that painting is this. It's just how close their fingers are. It's that proximity. It's that just moment before the touch creates it. And we will finish that in our mind. That's part of the Gestalt theory. So when I saw this in the Philippines, I loved it. I mean, I look at this, and this is Gestalt. You will complete this. Most people see right away what this is. And you guys know what it is, right? Pizza, right. You will finish it. You don't need everything. There's enough clues. You will complete it on your own. In the Galapagos, I saw this. This is similarity, past principle experience. You know, when you see that, and if you don't know what I'm seeing here, I'll add 2 little dots, and that'll help you along. Same thing with this. You'll complete it. Especially the guys usually see this right away. They know it's a bar sign, you know, but it's backwards and you don't see the whole word. You don't have to see everything all the time. We will finish things off. One of the things I love to photograph and collect are numbers. I go around and some people are going, what the hell is he taking? And it's just numbers. And I like different types of numbers. Things that I don't normally see. And then this one I noticed afterwards there was a bug in the picture. But I'm looking for numbers that are just numbers. And the funny thing is, in any language, it could be in Korea, like the image on the right. It could be in Greece, in China, in Japan, anywhere. Even the lettering is different, the numbers are the same. The numbers are numbers. So I collect all these numbers, and individually, the pictures are okay. Nothing special. I like them. But when I put them all together, it creates something different. The whole is greater than the parts. And this is one of my most popular posters. I get requested this by art directors a lot and other friends. My brother's a CPA. He has it in his office. So individually, not much. Put it all together, you get something else. And I like to think of projects like this. You know, and as a result, a lot of us photograph windows and doors, not an uncommon thing. And I haven't done anything with it, but I think together, like I've all of a sudden collected a whole bunch of blue doors or doors of color. And so I don't have anything with it yet, but I'm collecting. I like taking, on their own, these are nice, because I like the texture, I like the color, but I'm trying to think of what else I can do. Here's something else that I've been collecting, and I think this is another good example. These are bicycles in China. And I notice they have a lot of bicycles, and all in different shapes. In different shape, what I mean is in different conditions. And of course, they'll use them to transport things by people. They'll transport people. I guess he's steering her by shoulder movement. An older lady. And I have a bunch of these. I have a lot more than I'm showing here. And then I went into motorized vehicles and tricycles. And I have a whole collection of these, which I always love and find interesting. But all of those work together. Now, these images, this is one I took in the Philippines, is a nice image on its own, and I like it. This one I like too. And especially this one doesn't fit the other ones. They're vehicles, they're tricycles, they're bicycles. Visually, to me, they don't fit. Why? Because the other ones are in profile, basically. They're not at 3/4, they're not directly at me. They're in profile and very clean backgrounds. When I'm standing on a street to photograph these, I'm looking for the background. I'm not looking just for the object itself. They'll come by. I've had streets where I can just sit there all day and just watch things go by and wait. But what I'm looking for is the backgrounds that work. And the other ones, let's see if I can back up. So this one to me doesn't really work. It's an interesting shot, and I still like it. It's not a bad shot. But as a series, it's not going to work because together I think it throws off visually than getting the things that look a lot cleaner. And then in Indonesia, I found one spot. Everybody's going by in motorcycles, and the backgrounds were like okay. So if I pan the shot, the old-fashioned lowered the shutter speed, and it took a while to finally get it to where I was getting them really sharp and the background just where I wanted it. And that got rid of a lot of backgrounds, a lot of bad backgrounds. So I did a lot of that. So moving on to another subject. Oh, good. I always like words in photographs. I showed you all my numbers, which I collect. I also like words. I mean, some of these are pretty simple and basic. This was to the restrooms. I think in the Philippines. This obviously is New York. Hot bagels. But you will read the words in a picture, wherever they are, if it's in English. If you were Chinese, this was in Hong Kong, you would probably read the Chinese letters first and don't know if this would mean anything to you or not. But words in a picture, you'll always read immediately. You read it. Terrific. This was in Turkey. You've been there? You have that. It's great, isn't it? So this is, I have a couple pictures of when I was a teenager, way back when, in black and white. And this is one too. And I always like this for the Kodak, take Kodak film to the ball game. This was a AAA baseball club in Rochester, the Rochester Red Wings that I worked for many years. When I'm traveling to countries, I'm looking for names. I'm going to the really bad tourist souvenir shop sometimes, and I'm looking for something that has the name that I could use as a title slide. On certain jobs, I've had to go into restaurants where there's nothing in the restaurant because it's just pitch black, or they're serving and they don't want me taking pictures with the customers, and I got a fixed period of time and I got to come back with a shot. So one of the tricks I'll do is I'll take the matchbooks or a menu or something and just get the name. But notice that I'm just focusing on one very small part. I don't need it all in focus. Out of focus like that adds a little something. And I've done that many times. This was up in Boston. The Ritz wouldn't let me in. They said, we'll provide the pictures, which wouldn't look like anything else I was shooting, and the art director wasn't gonna like that. So I was outside on the street, which is public area, and shot this. Again, I don't have to see Ritz-Carlton completely to know that this is the Ritz-Carlton. It has a little more impact. It doesn't even have to be the right way. This is a wonderful cafe, Pershing Square, thank you. I went blank from it. I don't know why it's a Central Cafe, but this is a Pershing Square Cafe, which great bagels for breakfast. They import them all the way from Brooklyn, directly across from Grand Central. This is a restaurant in France called Le Welcome, but you'll read it. And sometimes words in a picture will give you a sense of place. This is the Sunday New York Times crossword puzzle. Just having that little bit off to the side tells you a lot more of the image. This was in Japan, and if you read this, it makes absolutely no sense, and it's not supposed to. They just like the words and the lettering. It's like the people who get the tattoos, Chinese tattoos on their arm, and God knows what it says. They don't know. We don't know. So this is similar. They, other than Chinese letters, which they get all the time, they like American letters. And once in a while, I get a picture of absolutely nothing. We try. This was actually an assignment for a magazine on Chelsea. This was a Chelsea diner, which is gone now. And just that word "eat" on his back as he's going away, you'll always read it. You'll also read logos. They stand out in pictures. So I'm kind of careful when I have things like this because they just dominate. But sometimes Kodak's not the same company it used to be. This was in Porto, Portugal, and it's just, I love this shot. I was actually on the other side, and because it was a translucent sign, I said, I hope it looks the same on the other. It was just as bad on this side, so I could get the backlight coming through to make it pop a little bit. And along with signs and names brings me to pictures that say something. So you don't have to read the words. So this is another collection of things that I like. It's not saying dogs are over here. This is in London telling you curb your dog over here. These are a little more straightforward. And this one. And sometimes you got to think about some of these. I was in Africa. This was the ladies' room, which was really nice. They put it on this little metal gazelle, which is graceful and nice. And then you go over to the men's room, and of course they put that on a pig. You know, some of these you don't explain, you just show them. This is in the Philippines. What was the difference? I don't know. And why didn't they just say no parking? This was in Arizona, for the fans of The Wizard of Oz. And I love signs that are just in your face and straightforward. Food, no, there's no question about what they got here. And things that tell you things, no. And these are separate. This is no, and this is photo, which brings me to a collection I love to get and I still work on, which is pictures that say no photos. This was just last month in Israel, in Old Jaffa. This is down in Soho. Sometimes I got to ask permission. Sometimes I'll sneak and get them. Sometimes I ask permission. Sometimes they think I'm completely crazy. So, but it's amazing how many times they tell us we can't take pictures. You know, and they're friendly. You know, in Hawaii it's malaho. You know, just wonderful. Hey, no pictures, no flash photography. I love this one with no bathing suits. And this one, no photos. But seriously, no photos. We'll come after you. I mean, in the fine print. A whole bunch of different things. And this is polite. Please, no photos, please. No cameras. I said I got a lot of these. The photos obviously were an afterthought that they added later. This was in Montenegro. And it's an aerial Montenegro, and he was selling these posters. And he wasn't selling posters, people were just taking pictures of it. So he put this in front of it. And I did it because I wanted the no photo sign. Oh, and this one in Korea I love, need permission. You're never going to get permission, but you need permission. And this one was in Israel, obviously, and I can't read Hebrew, unfortunately, and it was in front of going into a supermarket. And I thought, oh, security. And I had a friend ask the security guard, could we take a picture of it? And we went in, she told me later that it's not for security like something might happen. The reason you can't take pictures is they don't want you taking pictures of the prices of the items and comparing them. That's what, they took this down. They don't have that anymore at the supermarket. I was just there this couple months ago. So lights and shadows. This again is just getting into some of the things to think about in our photography. I didn't take this picture. This is the Mona Lisa, and we talk about, let me back up. Oh, and I don't have my notes on this one, and I did. There's a wonderful book by a woman, and I can't think of the name of it because it was in my notes and I don't have it here. But it's the anatomy of how we see things. And she has a whole chapter about the Mona Lisa and the fact that we talk about the Mona Lisa smile. And she's really dissected it, because if you get really close to it and look at it, she's really not smiling. But the reason we talk about the smiling is, and I have it, here it is, The Biology of Seeing by Margaret Livingston. And the mechanics of this in this wonderful book is dissected. And what she talks about is, if you look at anywhere else in the picture, your peripheral vision will see her smiling because of the way the shadows on her face are painted. The way he painted it, she has that mysterious smile because of the way it's painted. And so we're going to carry that over into our photographs. We want the viewers in our pictures to stay where we want them to stay. We want them to see what we want them to see. And our eyes in a photograph will follow the dark areas to light areas. And this is a pretty simple picture. It has a couple other elements. It has very strong leading lines, which is obvious, but it's also surrounded in dark areas, along the side. And it's concentrated that way, where it's dark at the edges and very, very light at the center. So our eye is always going to go there. And this is a very obvious image of it. I can't be more blunt than this. But our eyes will always go into the center where the light is. Where this image, really doesn't work on any level. It has strong leading lines, it has lights and darks, but all the lights are on the all the light areas are on the edge, taking us out. And our eye doesn't know where to go. We're just going all over the place with this. We don't have a central point, even though all those lines are pointing to that area in the center. So images like this, I'll work on a little bit more afterwards, vignetting, because when you look at this, your eye goes immediately to that lightest part in the word, and you read that right away. And it can be done subtly. I mean, this is a little bit heavy for me, but a lot of my pictures, like this one, I'll add a subtle dark vignette around the edges. And just keep an eye on this and you'll see the difference to this one. It's just very subtle, and that's what I want. I don't want you to say, oh look, he added a vignette on it. This is a little more obvious. Again, it's a gentle darkening, but with this, because the light is going straight across like this, it's almost a little bit flat. And if I add a gentle dark vignette, it sort of rounds it out a little bit more. Your eye goes into the center of this a little more, and the picture looks a little rounder to me, visually. And we can do the opposite too. This is a case of, these were window washers in Seoul, Korea. This wasn't the original capture, but in this I did the opposite. I added the light vignette around it because these guys were dark and in shadow. So for every rule, there's an opposite rule, it seems. So this is the original capture that I got. And in post, this is what I did. I softened the guy in the back, and I'll talk later about focus, and I did that. So it has a little more impact in it. Now in focus, this is a great quote. I don't know who wrote it, it's anonymous. 1 photo out of focus is a mistake. 10 photos out of focus are an experimentation. 100 photos out of focus is a style. And it's very, very true. And focus, again, with light and dark, focus is something else that'll get us to look into different areas. I did this photo for a magazine ad on Quebec City. And we went in, and I loved this restaurant because they had a balcony I could shoot from, and I got the hustle and bustle, and it was great. And this is, a real action shot, and they ran this. Afterwards, one of the first things I did when I started with Photoshop, because this goes back a ways, is I softened everything around him. And so your eye goes to the center. And now it's a completely different picture. I can invoke a lot of different words to this. Loneliness, isolation, depression, nothing uplifting, but it gives you a sense and a feeling that's completely different because of the focus and out of focus. So this doesn't really need any help. This is a wedding procession in Korea. But I just use it as an example where she's the only one facing me, and if I take everything else and just soften it a little bit, you go that much quicker to her. So these little tricks sometimes you want to do. There's a trick that some of us know where if you shoot a portrait of someone and your focus wasn't correct because you didn't know all the things I told you about the focus points, and you back focused it on the background, but the picture was really good of the people, but they're a little soft. The trick with that is select the background that's in focus and put it out of focus a lot. And then the slightly out of focus midground will look a lot sharper. So that's a little trick. Now you don't have to do it in post either. I'll do it with long lens wide open. This was a restaurant shot, Morimoto's restaurant, as they were prepping food. And again, strong leading line going into it. The guy doing it is way out of focus, so you're concentrating more on the focus part. Same thing with this. This is an 85 1.2, and it's just a little bit in focus in the center. Everything else, and I darkened everything else around it. And again, your eye will go right into the hands, into that circle in the center. That's where I want you to look. It's a very, very quick read. That's something we always talk about in advertising, quick reads. I also, a lot of people, when I'm doing workshops, seem to get stuck in what I call the midground. And there's 3 parts to a picture that I like to think about, and it's foreground, midground, and background. And you want to emphasize some of them, you can do it with focus. We all know about background bokeh or bokeh, depending on your preference, because 2 different pronunciations. I'll call it bokeh, background bokeh, but don't forget, there's also foreground bokeh, which really creates depth in images. So something like this I always like. Good background, something in the front out of focus. Your eye really goes there. This was something I shot in Toronto at a restaurant. We're having breakfast. This was somebody in the next booth. Something out of focus in the foreground. She's in the midground, out of focus in the background. These were done in a classroom. And again, I'm moving a little bit to get that little bit of out of focus. So it's not just the kid there. There's a little more depth in the image. Same thing with this. Now this was shot in Mexico at a resort, and these were models. And I put a glass, I had a drinking glass, and I'm holding that in front of the camera here to give me that bit of depth. So I have my foreground bokeh, I have my midground in focus, and the background out of focus. And this is just another take on that, where I'm just moving the glass a little bit more, just to get something out of focus. I've done it with glasses. I have little mirrors I used to carry around that used to help on doing things like that, but these are just similar images. This is an old advertisement I had a long time ago. And again, it's in Gestalt theory, this would be field ground. You know, we're a lot out of focus. She's in focus, and I'm looking through things like that, and things out of focus. There's mirrors there that are also confusing things. And I like the writing, which is probably hard to read where you are. A long, depressing winter, no better pick-me-up than Aunt Patrice. Oh, you're reading better than I am. Late March in Paris. Her favorite bistro, cassoulet. Ooh, great dish on a cold day. Of course, best of all, her wonderful stories. Winter Be Gone. This is another one just because I found it with the same thing, from the same thing. Pays Basque, no American breakfast, croissants and tissue from the bakery, outside coffee and a table at the bar. One of the locals arrives. Wordlessly, a shot is placed before him, and I thought my coffee was strong. And look at that nose and the hat. You know he's French. And again, you don't see all the details. This one I really love because it invokes the feeling of where you are. And those are some of the things that I look for. So moving on, our eyes are dynamic chromatic devices, but they're very, very easy to fool. One of the first things you should do as a photographer, and I'm teaching now a graduate class on the business of photography at SVA, but one of the first things they do in this graduate program is they run this Munsell test to see where you're colorblind. This isn't the test itself, but this is a colorblind test. And you should be able to see numbers up here, like 42, 25, 29, but there is a ringer in here, this one right there. If you see numbers there, you are colorblind. So it runs both ways. So most people are colorblind to a degree, but there's different degrees, and you get this test and you find out exactly where you're a little deficient with color. This is something else on fooling our eyes. This was an owl in Africa, and here it's pretty easy to see because I've centered him and he's in the middle. When we were there, this took us a long time to find. This was being pointed out to us. We still had a hard time finding him because you can't see where the tree starts and the owl ends, you know, because of the edges. That's how camouflage works. It's upsetting the edges. The zebras in Africa, you know, they stand out from the background. There's no midground background there. They're white and black, and you know everything is brown, and they pop out. That's not their camouflage. Their camouflages are the stripes. And what they're doing is, if you're a lion, you can't see where one starts and one ends. That's why they stay in groups. You don't really see them apart too much. They stay in groups because that's their camouflage. They can't pick out a singular zebra. This is something else on how our eyes are fooled. This works better when it's smaller, and the guys in the back probably see it a little bit better. But it looks like the lines are you know, they're not perpendicular. They look like they're at angles, but they're not. It's because of the way the white and the black go. So if I took a line, a straight line that I know is straight, and I ran it down anywhere, you'll see that those lines are all straight. There isn't a curved line in there. But that's an optical illusion. This is another one with tones. I'm going to go quickly on this. This is from Dr. Edward Adelson at MIT. A and B are two different grays, but they're actually the exact same shade of gray. And if I go in and move one to the other, and there's no trickery there, what I'll do now is I'll go and connect the two. and you'll see visually that it's the same tone. But if you look at this by itself all day long, the A square is always going to look darker than the B square, much darker. I mean, it's obviously darker. The reason is the A square is surrounded by lighter tones, the B square is surrounded by darker tones. And that's all it takes for us to throw us off on that, is the tones like that. And this was something else I just found the other day that I'm going to use here for an introduction, because I like these little films. And I want to talk a little bit about color and color matters. And how it relates to what we do. Now, when you look at this, depending on where you're sitting or anything, it'll appear that some of these wheels turn, but not when you look at the wheel. It'll always be in your peripheral vision. But that's because of the vibrancy between the blue and the yellow. That vibrancy is going to create that movement. So I look for things with those color combinations. I look for color combinations when I'm going around, and I want to see what I can see. You know, so this blue wall with these yellow bananas attracts me. And if you stare at this long enough, the bananas will start to peel themselves. So a shot like this, it's like, this doesn't work in black and white. This works because of the color combination. And when I see something like this, I'm going to try and get shots like this. Now, one of my favorite shots, and we have it on the door opening here, was this with some kids in it. I saw this wall with the roughly painted windows, which this is in Indonesia. And also, if you go to Portugal, they like to paint their windowsills too. It's a great place to shoot. But I saw this with the yellow wall, and I said, "Oh, this is great." I got this, and then there was a little girl in a blue outfit. I said, "Oh, I really want her on there." Couldn't get her to go there. She was just very shy, and oh no, you know. So she was staying away. I just couldn't get her to go at the window. So I worked around it a little bit. There was a little boy there, so I started to photograph him and his friend. This is just a straight shot. We also had a speed light with me, with a remote and a little collapsible softbox. And I had what's known as an audio-powered light stand, which is the guy standing next to me. I'm telling him, okay, hold it this way, up, down, left, and right. Voice-controlled light stand. So this is the exact same spot. So you can see this, and this is just done with the strobe and the softbox with it. So I'm getting him, and then he has a friend who comes over who's very outgoing. He wants to be in the picture. So now I'm getting these guys, and I got this, and I really like this. And then I moved them out a little bit and started getting them. Well, now the girls are seeing what's going on. It's a girl in the blue and a girl in the yellow, and she, you know, starts getting closer, and I'm taking pictures, and I'm showing them what the pictures look like, which is important. I finally got them to all go over by the wall, and this was one of my favorite pictures from there. And what I really like is, you know, they're looking at me, but this kid is looking up at them, and that little, I'm going to talk more about a gesture like that, what that means in a photograph. But the color combination is what I was trying to go for. That's one of the reasons this image works for me. This was another one where at first I shot the boy straight on, which is, you know, our first compulsion is to square things up. But as I went, I saw that there was color in the background, so I moved off to the side because I wanted that red behind him, the red and the green and the blue. So I see scenes like this, it attracts me to these areas. I'm going to look for these color combinations. This is another one on how easy it is to fool our eyes. And I'm going to go quick on this because I go usually much longer in it. But this green and this blue in the center are the same color. And it has to do with the colors around it. So I'm going to just zoom in. And there's no trickery on this. I'm going to take the blue and just move it up. It's the same color. And it has to do with the orange and the magenta, whether it goes around it or through it or at the end. And it's how that combines will affect how we see color. So color and shape, there's certain images that depend on color for the image. A picture like this doesn't work in black and white. It's all about the color, especially his teeth. This was a clown. He was a great act. But getting him to do stuff, I didn't get anything but just the straight close-up shot. And you'll notice on some of my portraits too, I'm not scared to cut off their heads. I want to fill the frame. So it really, that's the story I want, is that outfit and the color. Where a picture like this, without Without color, it's about the shapes. It's about all these doors and the repeating doors. With color, it's a completely different image. And that's the image I like. This is in Porto, Portugal. This was a wall that I saw in Korea, and I just waited and waited, couldn't get anything. I started to leave. I saw the monk walking down the street, ran back, and got this shot of the monk going here. And again, in black and white, it's just not the same thing. This was a stand in Coney Island. It's no longer there. And black and white, it's okay, but it really depends on the color. The color really makes it a completely different image. This is in Dubrovnik in Croatia. They have these beautiful orange roofs, which is wonderful, which is a story unto itself. I just want to see what it looked like in black and white to make it look older, and I went to black and white, and I really didn't like it. It's just a jumble of shapes and things. But then, when I did sepia to it, it worked on what I wanted it to look like. So color should match the images. Like I said earlier, in Tuscany, this is what you get. But to me, this evokes more of the feeling of the place. This is more of a sense of a place. And it's warming up the color temperature a lot warmer and adding a little bit of texture to it. This is the opposite. This is in China, and it's a calligrapher at the end of an alleyway. And I went to correct the yellow light with an eyedropper, and when I corrected that, it turned the wall outside blue. The outside wall wasn't blue. This is what it did, and created a much more impactful image that I licensed, which I was happy to do. And sometimes I'll take pictures, and if I want to get more blue in a sunset or in a sky, I'll change the color temperature, the white balance, to tungsten, and it'll do this. And that's all I did. In post, I just changed the white balance from whatever it was, daylight or Kelvin, to tungsten, and you're going to add the blue this way. So here's a skyline of Tokyo, and this was shot in auto white balance. This was daylight white balance, tungsten white balance, and this is fluorescent white balance. So which one is correct out of these four? The answer is any of them. It's subjective. Color balance is a personal decision, and there is no correct balance. Each one will do a slightly different feel to it. So how are we doing on time? Good. Color and texture. I'm going to zip through this a little bit. This is just, again, I'm looking for the colors and textures in images. And I want to skip ahead to some other stuff. So textures I'll add to images. I've been doing a lot of that lately. So I'll get this, and I like it. It's a nice, straightforward portrait of an officer in China. But I've been doing stuff like this. I've been trying to make it look like an old picture, and I'm adding, in various ways, different layers of texture to it. And doing it with these. These were a festival that they had, and I got these images, and in post, I created something completely different by adding the texture. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. Changing the backgrounds. So I'm doing a lot more posts to try and get something else, something I haven't seen before. Scenes that I've got that are nice images, but trying to create a feeling in the final image. And as you can see, I'm not a purist. I'll do whatever it takes visually to get the image that I want. This is one where I want it to look like an old photograph that they had, in a family heirloom. So that's a close-up, and this is what it looks like as you back off a little bit. This was I'm going blank. This was in Indonesia. I just got off a 24-hour flight. They took it to a museum where I had to give a lecture, and they had this whirling dervish, and I got this shot. Except the walls were pure white, and the shot just looked blah. But adding this texture changed it completely. Adding the texture really gave it a completely different feel. So I'm doing that a lot to images. This is one where I worked on this in post. This was a grab shot in Japan. This is the original capture. Uh-oh, we got a National Weather Service warning. Uh-oh, head for the hills. So if you look at this, what I did in post is exactly what I talked about, the vignetting. If you look, the whitest area is down here. His face is a little dark. It's sort of a neutral blah background. And what I did is I added a slightly different background. I darkened the edges, and if you squint at this image, your eye will then come up into here now, where before it wouldn't. And so like I said, some of these things are done subtly because I want you to look where I want you to look. I don't want your eye going out of the image. This is just some more texture things. This one I went a little bit wild. I wanted it to look like a fresco on a wall. These are some Hawaiian dancers on the beach. These are just some other texture pictures. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. So some principles of design. Wow. So you should know a lot of these principles: rules of thirds, leading lines, framing, selective color, blah, 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 terrible tangents, which is proximities, and something I'll call border patrol, which I will talk about. Rule of thirds, I mean, you should all know that. That's a really obvious one. You divide it up into thirds. Generally, on most of these, if you have a horizon line, you want it on the lower third area because gravity and things weigh down that way. But as any rule, some rules are meant to be broken. Here's one where the horizon line is in the upper third because it's more interesting stuff down below. And the interesting stuff I want to have in there. So there's my horizon line. There's the other third, rule of thirds. Know the rules, but don't be a slave to them. Here we have the horizon line in the middle, which I tell you not to do because it divides the picture. But sometimes you want it for this mirror effect. If you have a symmetry sometimes, you will put it that way. This is another one that I was talking about earlier. And again, people will say, oh, you put the horizon line right in the middle. But it does divide it in half, which is interesting. But to me also, the color combination is interesting, and it does something interesting in the middle, and it works because it's balanced. If you look at it, there's the weight of the guy on the left, and it's sort of equal to the three little figures on the right. And if you look, it's a balanced image to me. Also, what makes it work is a triangle, and I like triangles in images. It's a very common composition in images, and triangles are very, very strong. And that's one of the reasons I think this works. This is called a Necker cube, and it's an optical illusion in that if you look at one of the squares, you're either looking at the bottom of a square and the two sides from the bottom up, or it's the top of a square looking down, both at the same time. And that's called a Necker cube. And it's interesting when I see it in images. I took this, it's one of my road shots as we're zipping past, and later I looked and I said, oh look, her scarf is a Necker cube design, which is quite common. I like images that are visual jokes. There's two birds here, and the way the shadows are going, it looks like he's just split in half. This is one of my favorite images, and it doesn't look like much. It's a stone staircase in Portugal. And if you look at it, there's something wrong with the image. And what it is, I know some of you have seen this before, and you know exactly what it is. It's upside down, where this is the correct view. And it has to do with how our eyes perceive light coming from the top going down. So if you look at it, and I'll flip it around twice again, but like this rock here that's coming out at you, that's boulder, when you look at it this way, it looks like it's indented in. It looks like an indentation in the earth. And it's the way we perceive light. And I'll flip it one more time. You'll see the correct version. So in things like this, it's concave originally. And if you flip it upside down, it's then convexed. And then this was something I saw in Utah in a bar. This is before 6 beers, and after 6 beers, they'll flip it over for you, and you get that. So turning your images upside down will sometimes give you a fresh perspective on your composition. That's why the old landscape photographers that work with view cameras, they could really see the composition because it was upside down. And changing your point of view also changes the composition. So this was a market in a small island in Indonesia. And you've been to these things. It's like hustle and bustle. It's a lot of stuff. This isn't a great image. This is just to show you what the place was. You know, it's a lot of things going on, and I'm looking for pictures. So I'm trying to isolate things. Doesn't always work. You know, nothing great there. I like to focus in on individuals because I like people, and I'll talk and I'll get nice little things. I'll look for good light. You know, I'll follow where my eye goes for light. But then if I want to get graphic, I'm going to go up above, and I'm going to shoot from the top down. And it sounds like a simple thing, but I did this to a friend of mine who went out somewhere, and I saw some pictures he started doing from up above down, and they were just really incredible. This also works because it's a lot of round circles in the image. So it's very, very graphic with the color and everything else. So I'm shooting things looking down, trying to isolate from this hustle and bustle, this visual hustle and bustle. I'm trying to tell the story very simply. And this is probably my favorite shot from that. I'm holding the camera over her at wide and shooting a couple, hoping that I'm getting the framing. And I love it because of the round circles, and the only thing square is in the middle where she has the, you know, the fish. This was her wrapping paper, were these leaves. This is the banana lady. This is the chicken guy. And as I was leaving, I saw these guys gambling and playing cards. And I've tried to get these before, and it's hard to get something at this level. But the board looked interesting. So again, I'm just reaching over and shooting from above to shoot straight down. And I think it's a little more interesting. This was a luncheon I went to. This was for one person. It was it was so good. This was in Northern Ireland at a bed and breakfast. This is tea time in the afternoon. And again, just shooting above and getting a very graphic shot is real interesting. Back in the market, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to look for colors and things, and I'm going to fill the frame. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So same thing here. I have no idea what that is, but I love the color. So I look at a lot of my images and I frame the people in them. I like pictures where there's a framing going on. I mean, it's a very obvious type of thing. Just going to run through these. And I talked earlier about border patrol, and what I mean by border patrol is not a pretty border around things, but I look at images and I will look around the edges. This has been worked on in post. This is the original capture. And the original capture has a light area here and a light area here and a pole sticking out here that's lighter in tone. That's taking me out of the picture. So if I do my border patrol here and I'm looking at it and I'm squinting a little bit, the lighter tones are over there. Even though they're little, they're taking me out of the image. So it's real easy in post to get rid of that. The other thing that I do is photographers like to complete things. They like to, you know, show the edges of things like this. To me, this is a mistake. I will crop this. What I want is I want to crop into it so it continues on. If you show where it ends, it ends. That's the end of it. It's done and finished. I like pictures where I'm cutting into it. Here's the same shot, and I'm more contained into it. My eye isn't going off to that bright spot at the edge. That's really not part of the center of the image. It's not part of the story I want to tell. It's photographers sometimes trying to do too much. Where this is pretty simple. This is in China at a art school, and they were marching for us. And just a simple crop of this, I think, makes it more interesting, where it now continues. You don't see where the last person is. Cropping into it means it continues on and on. So pictures like this, I don't want to show you where the edges are, where this field of green ends. I want to fill the frame so it continues in your imagination beyond. Another thing I look for is, and it's a Gestalt thing, is duplication, repetition, or repeated patterns. And that can take on a wide variety of things. Here's lanterns in Korea. This is an apartment building in Israel. And again, the fact that I'm not showing you the edge of the building, the pattern and everything continues and continues. You want to fill the frame. Same thing here. I mean, this ends, but not visually on here. Here, it just continues forever. And so I'll get a lot of things like this. You know, when I shoot these, you know, this is cinnamon sticks in Tel Aviv market. And I have a whole series of these types of close-up things in my kitchen in little tiny frames, and they look really nice together. but it's filling the frame. This was soap that I just shot in December in Jerusalem in a store. And these are just other things of duplication. This was actually in the ballpark when I was a teenager in Rochester. You know, it doesn't have to be the exact same thing, but it's similar things. This one I have no explanation for. It's just an image. So again, just repeating patterns in Jerusalem, in the Philippines. This is in Ecuador where they make Panama hats. This is interrupted pattern. In Venice, similar things. So they don't have to be the exact same thing. It could be similar things. And then this was at a great restaurant in Tel Aviv port called Old Man in the Sea. The Arab restaurants there, when you go to them, all have these little dishes that they serve you. And you can get just that and not order a main meal, and it's more than enough. I like it, but I like even more. So what I did after in post is duplicate it. And if I could do it a little bit, I may as well go wild and do it a lot. And repeated pattern. Just in post, just duplicating it, flipping it, adding it. And I'll do that not only to food dishes, but mechanical items too. This was up in Silo City, up in Buffalo, and I'll be going there in June. They're adding on to the Silo City workshop. I'm doing one on shooting people portraits on location. And that'll be on my website if anybody's interested. I know I have one person going in the crowd. Yeah, it's a wonderful place to shoot. But these are just taking images and duplicating them over and over and over again. Again, something you haven't seen before. Now, this is the finished image. This is one of the first ones I did. This is what I started with. This is the image that got that. And it's just duplicating it and moving it back and forth. Here's another one. This is the finished image. And this is the frame that I got it from. Now, the one thing I did do is I did retouch the label out. But otherwise, what you see here is what I got there. So, how our IC and how we react. Our first 10,000 photos are your worst. There's an image I took when I was in high school, and to me, there's a lot of things in this image that really, really work for a variety of reasons. One is scale, and that's one of the things I'm going to talk about in a minute. Rule of thirds is obvious in this image. It's a silhouette. Sometimes it's good to let the shadows tell the story. And what I really want to talk about at this point is gesture. And this is a term that Jay Maisel uses, and I'm stealing it from him. All credit to Jay. And gesture is that little something in an image. It could be a human gesture. It could be something that's not human. But gesture in a picture just makes it something else. The fact that this guy, the father, is leaning over to his little son is all the difference in the world. If he was standing very straight, it would be okay. But the gesture humanizes it. This image I took in Istanbul. And you know, it's a Muslim country. The women don't like to be photographed necessarily, but I like their scarves. But what really makes the picture work is her hand on her hip. You know, that oi, you know, long day. It tells a story. Where, to me, this is an image of gestures. This is an obvious gesture. This is a fight between two guys. You know it's Italy. And this was something I just took recently with the new Canon M5, which is a mirrorless camera, which I love for street photography because, Eric has one in the back. Can you run it up for just one quick second? I just want to show one feature on it. A lot of features I like on it, especially the focus. It's nice and light, but what I really love is this goes at 45 degrees. I can put my finger here, and it's like the old twin lens reflexes. I can go around and shoot like this at a nice level. I can get really low, or people can't tell. When I'm doing this, you know I'm taking a picture of you. When I'm doing this, it's not so obvious. I'm fiddling with the camera or doing something else. But really cute little camera. Thank you, Eric. I'm going to keep it. Oh, shoot.
I don't think so.
Oh, well, I tried. Yeah. So this shot that I just took recently, because I was playing with the camera, you know, the gesture is right here. Without him, you know, the red coat stands out looking at the kid and looking, longing back at that makes a difference. This, I got a lot of shots of this cow race in Indonesia. And this is the one, because of the gesture, is the final shot for me, because it really works. You know, anticipation. Where this shot is blah for me. You know, it's framed, it's nice, they're colorful, yada, yada, yada. It's another postcard shot. What I'm looking for is that gesture. This is the next portico over. They're waiting for the rain before they could start marching. So just that hand to the face is that little gesture that humanizes it, and that's what I look for. Sometimes it could just be a look on a face that is the gesture. It doesn't have to be overt. A lot of them were waiting to see what's going on, and one little kid leaned over. What a difference that made for me. That was a gesture that I'm looking for in the image. These are just some other moments like that, movement. Sometimes, like I said, it's just what's going on and the look on her face. That blank look is, you know, as she's trying to multitask, does it. Where these shots, these are two that are very similar. It works on a lot of levels, but what I really like is he just looked at me slightly. If he's looking straight ahead and I'm not making that eye contact, I lose that gesture. Where this is not a woman to be fooled with. You can tell by that look. And these are just other little gestures. Scale is something else I look for in images. And it's another part of Gestalt theory. It's something like this, which I shot in Portugal. It's about scale. And what you don't like is you're trying to shoot these wonderful monuments and things in these places, and there's these tourists, and they're everywhere, and you're trying to figure out how to get rid of them. In this case, I need the tourists, because without the tourists, you don't know the size exactly of what the statue is. You don't know if it's 2 feet high or as mammoth as it is. What a difference that makes. So many times we want somebody in scale. I know landscape photographers, whoops, I'll jump ahead. Landscape photographers who will have like a red jacket or yellow jacket, and they make their assistant run out, and it's a little tiny figure in their landscape shot, because without it, you just don't get how grandiose it can look. So same thing with, you know, this doorway or with this painting, even though they're back a ways, you don't just see how huge it is without. These are just some other images of scale. This is in Alaska. This is the side of another boat, and you see the little tiny people. This is from Silo City, and it's one of my favorites. I love the texture on the side of a silo, but you can see the little door and windows to get an idea of the size of this. What I really want is a worker in a yellow jacket running across here. We're going to try that one of these years. Again, size, relationship, scale, to get a feeling of vastness in a place. Same thing in Africa, I'm working on scales. This is a different type of scale. You know, we're thinking twins. And this in the Galapagos is scaley, not scale. It's something different, so don't confuse the two. Changing weather, like we're having today here in New York, is a great time. Changing weather creates amazing light. One friend of mine once said that Ansel Adams didn't photograph landscapes. Ansel Adams photographed weather. And if you look at his images, that's really true, the changing weather pattern. I was in Arizona. We were supposed to go shoot with a friend of mine, Paul Marco, and Jeff Kinda from Arizona Highways, the art director, and we got snowed out from the Grand Canyon. I didn't know you can get snowed out in Arizona, but we did. And so we went somewhere else, and we were photographing, and in the distance, this was a storm that kept us away. But that changing weather pattern, that storm coming in, that light and dark is what really made the shot, rather than just a clear sunny day with blue sky. Same thing in Italy. It rained for 2 of the days in my workshop, but it was wonderful, because once it stopped raining, we ran out and got this hand of God light coming through, adding another element to the beautiful landscape we got there. There's just some more light like that. I'm just going to keep going. See if I can skip ahead. Come on, come on, come on, come on. I got to speed that up a bit. And there's another one. And I'm going to end this part of it before I take any questions on another quote that I like. Failure is the mother of success. It's a traditional Chinese proverb. It goes with another saying that I like, which is, if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. And that's a traditional Reznicki proverb. And what I mean by that is, you want to stretch. You want to go beyond just shooting that postcard, shooting that thing that you know you're going to get. I will shoot the postcard, but I want to go beyond it. I want to see what else I can get. And in doing that, I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. It's part of the process. And that's how we learn. So with that, the clock on the wall is telling me it's out of time. Thank you very much. You've been a great group. Thank you for coming.